coordinate.
Right, I can see my slides. Are people able to hear me? Oh,
Yes.
right. Thank you. Oh, let me just go. Right, okay. The first thing I have to say is for the last several minutes looking at Nick's screensaver, I was sitting here cringing, thinking he's gonna think I pinched his headline. This is something I just totally made up, but I guess it's a phrase that's in a lot of our minds. Everything is connected. It's not like an official Friends of the Earth strapline, but it just kind of, for me, fitted with what I'm going to try and describe to everyone. Okay, so very briefly, just to kind of revisit the summary I made right at the beginning. Friends of the Earth as an organization operates at four different levels, if you like. There are local groups such as ourselves, Liverpool Friends of the Earth, and in the middle of the screen now, that's just a screenshot of our Twitter homepage. So there we are. If you don't follow us already, please feel free to. And that description of us, our meetings, but the second line, that we try and campaign on environmental and social justice. See the two things as like inseparable, and do local, national, and global campaigns. So talking of global, the other icons on that screen, Biofuel Watch, are a campaign group who are particularly focused on the concerns about chopping down other people's forests and primarily shipping them to Europe, in our case, Drax, and burning them. Bottom right, that logo which says JA is the logo of Justicia Ambiental, who are Friends of the Earth Mozambique. And as I will describe later, we do have a direct link with them. And on the left-hand side, there's the 50 years, which was actually 2 years ago now. But beneath the 50 years, that is the logo of Friends of the Earth International. So as I said a couple of times already, we're the local group. We in turn have immediate support from the regional organisation, Friends of the Earth Northwest, who do have a couple of paid staff, Helen and Estelle. Estelle normally, who support local groups such as ourselves, Estelle works with us and Chester, but she has a massive workload involved with the fighting the nonsense. It's the Cumbrian campaign, coal mine proposal as well. Helen, who's been around for probably 15 or so years, her patch is more kind of Manchester focused, but it's all pretty fluid and everyone knows each other. Beyond that, next tier up, Friends of the Earth, England, Wales, Northern Ireland, which is the original national group of Friends of the Earth. And then, as per the logo on the left-hand side, there are, I believe, 70 odd national organizations which have the umbrella of FoE International. And that in some ways presents us as a group in Liverpool, both with an interesting set of circumstances, but also some challenges. I mean, I don't think we're alone as a Liverpool group in kind of recognizing that the city's quite legitimate and well recognized status as a global city. And it's felt to us for quite a long time that to kind of not be aware and engage with that global city context would be an opportunity that's missed. But there's no way that we as a local group can effectively get engaged with all international campaigns. So we've had to be selective, and then part of the problem alongside that is the more we do in an international context probably distracts us or takes away our resources from perhaps been as involved in local campaigns as we might wish. Let me move on to the next slide, because probably a lot of what I just said is on it. Okay, yes. First bullet point, covered that one. So for us, the fact that we got the Port of Liverpool and its kind of expansion and the proposals for it to become, or the actuality of it becoming a free port, and particularly some of the products that come in through the port, through our international networks, we fully recognize that some of those products, even though they might be like wonderful for our first world lifestyles and industry and the economy, if you look at the other end of the supply chain, the news is not so good. There are communities, let's say in the southern United States, for example, where their ecosystems are suffering because of logging by companies providing the wood pellets for Drax power station in Yorkshire. Those wood pellets are shipped across the Atlantic, coming through the port of Liverpool. We've probably all seen those big grey and blue hopper wagons being pulled behind trains. Quite a good in inverted commas place to see them is when they come through Edge Hill station on the way to Yorkshire. But if and we have made some attempts to kind of raise community and decision maker awareness on the downside of that. More of that later. And similarly, products that come in, feed and primarily in the source of soybeans that are sourced from South America. If you just look at our end of the telescope from our industry's perspective, it's great. This stuff comes in through Liverpool and it's processed in Liverpool, and then shipped to chicken farms across the UK to feed chickens, basically, that then go to our local supermarkets. But at the other end, there are some massive downsides to impacts on communities and their environment where these soybeans are grown to the detriment of the indigenous ecosystems and the indigenous communities. So yeah, third point, I think pretty much said that. We just feel it's necessary to kind of spotlight some of these issues, because it felt like a bit of a net that things might be slipping through. We became aware of these issues of products coming in through the port, for example. Didn't necessarily feel that these were kind of being flagged up in Liverpool and the city region as problems. So that has become a kind of major area in where we're trying to actually well, exactly that, flag up these concerns with decision makers and politicians regionally. Fourth point says exactly this. Certainly at this level, there's absolutely no way that a group which has probably got a similar number of active members as Transition has. I mean, we've got our contact list of a couple of hundred, but in terms of numbers who actually get involved with campaigns, it's a much smaller number. So we got to work with allies, and one of the logos on that first slide, Biofuel Watch, it's kind of their campaign. They're one of the main players in raising the awareness of the harms that are caused by the international biomass industry and market. So all that we do in a lot of cases, and that's one example, is kind of play a supporting role and go along to actions, try and play our part in raising the political awareness. Fifth point, I've kind of touched on this, and this is a really interesting one. I think at the end of when I'm talking, I'm probably gonna ask you guys what you think the solution might be here, because we well know at the same time as feeling it's absolutely necessary to kind of challenge some of these normalizations of international harm, and Liverpool being the focal point of that. It's obviously not everyone's cup of tea. If someone comes along and says, "Oh, I've heard of Friends of the Earth, I'd like to get involved," and it was only this kind of strategic, quite kind of daunting stuff that is us. We know that will deter some people, especially if they just approach the group. So, as per Andy's the campaign that Andy described earlier, I think we're trying to find perhaps, let's call it, a more healthy balance of what we try to do, small stuff and big stuff. Again, knowing that we can't do it all. Yeah, so the 3 points from the bottom is going back to our kind of strategic international work. It is a reality that national Friends of the Earth, so remember that's like the third tier up in the hierarchy, so Friends of the Earth, England, Wales, Northern Ireland, have just launched a new campaign. Right, let me just go back to that. So Friends of the Earth, National Friends of the Earth, offer to local groups or to the public generally a kind of rolling smorgasbord, if that makes sense, of campaigns that they're running at any given time. And there may be like 3 or 4 strategic campaigns or small issue campaigns that the individuals and local groups such as ourselves can choose to be engaged with. We don't have to do them all, but they do like us to be involved with one of those that National FoE put forwards. So they've just launched this new one, Planet Over Profit campaign. That is actually a hyperlink, but I won't dive in there right now, because if you got this presentation, you can have a look for yourselves. But basically, that is drawing attention to all these examples, but it's primarily around deforestation and industrial agriculture and the harms that causes to overseas or global south primarily communities. And when National FoE decided to do this, they came back to us because they knew what we were trying to do around the port and some of the products being shipped in through that, and they were quite open, saying because of what we'd been trying to do, I'll emphasize the word trying to do as a local group, they recognize that would form the basis of something they would offer to all local groups. Obviously, not everyone's going to focus on the Port of Liverpool, not if you live in the south of England or the East Coast, whatever, but it can be something that may appeal to some local groups who are interested, like we are, in the kind of connection between what we do in our society with a product which has its origins in someone else's community, not necessarily to the benefit of that other community. Okay. Penultimate one. This can be a little bit troubling sometimes, but I don't want to be too downbeat about it. But it does occur to some of us in Liverpool Friends of the Earth, me, and I'm definitely one of these people, that understanding that there are these harms being done by the corporates at a kind of huge scale in some of the communities and ecosystems. If you're looking at this kind of in a downbeat manner, you could say, well, so much forest has been chopped down in wherever. Well, the Amazon's a typical one, isn't it? Is that actually undermining all the positive things that community groups in the UK are going to do? You know, if you put it in stark terms, surely the brilliant work that community groups in the UK in terms of planting more trees is just like massively overwhelmed by the number of trees that have been chopped down somewhere else. But I think it might be helpful not to actually dwell on that too much, and certainly not be disheartened about the positives of doing what we can in our own communities. But I think at the same time, maybe a kind of constructive pathway there is to be doing positive things in your own community, recognizing that there are counterbalancing harms done elsewhere in this same kind of sphere. And once you've made that connection, you have that recognition, you may then wish or choose to kind of push and campaign to get justice elsewhere, in that particular domain. I might pause at the end of this slide and just check that I've not completely lost everyone. So yeah, the last point, pretty much the same kind of idea, and it was a bit of a personal kind of search for me, like this whole complexity of local perspectives going out to global ones, and how they might connect, like the little local things you try to do for good, and some bigger harms that are done at a global level. How can you perhaps most easily visualize that you're doing something which is kind of working towards solving that global problem? And for me, and I've not actually come across anyone who said, no, Don, this doesn't at all encapsulate that kind of view at the local to global level. I think the next slide possibly, and you'll all have seen, I would imagine, kind of perhaps summarizes that fit between those two perspectives. I'll just pause there. If I hear nothing back, I'll carry on. But if Margaret, you want to come in and say, Don, they've all fallen asleep or they're all looking terrified, then I'll try and change the tone.
I have to confess I can only see you, but you haven't lost me, Don, so I'm going to assume everyone else is fine too.
I can see there's 8 participants, so I think that's as we were. Right, okay. So the next slide, one visual, and you may, as I've suggested, recognize it. Anyone familiar with donut economics as originated by Professor Kate Raworth and her very famous book about presenting an alternative economic system which isn't about growth, but it's defined by the donut economics, and the boundaries of the donut labeled there in the dark green, ecological ceiling, like the limitations of the various earth sectors of the earth ecosystems that can't be exceeded. If you go outside that, in any of those sectors, any of those pie pieces, if you like, you go outside that outermost green circle, you are exceeding what the earth can sustain, to use a kind of the most overused word in the English language. On the inner ring of the donut, so the inner dark green, that's the kind of level that you need to be at in each of the sectors, pieces of the pie, whereby societies globally are provided for, so you can actually have a fair, comfortable, and reasonable lifestyle. So in very broad terms, where we all need to operate, and the reds indicate that in many areas we don't, we're either exceeding the global boundaries of what the earth can support, or look at all the shading on the within the inner circle, and that's an indication that there are huge parts of the global community that are under resourced to have a comfortable, fair, and just lifestyle. So maybe it doesn't quite do it, but still in my mind, I'm waiting for someone else to come along and say, if you as an individual or as a local group are trying to understand how you are working towards improving the global perspective, I think this diagram is still for me a good place to kind of reflect on that. So yeah, we're operating in that particular sector there. We're a tiny little dot in that sector there, but at least we're working in the relevant area where we can see it in a global perspective. There's a problem. We're doing the right thing. We've identified the problem, and if we have the energy and the resource, we then may be able to kind of push and raise awareness of that problem and campaign for positive change for everyone. Right, that was one brief slide. Okay, some of our big stuff. I've touched on this actually. This is actually a screenshot from an article in The Guardian 2 or 3 years ago now. So essentially, it's a red dotted line from I met a Brazilian student at the University of Liverpool. We went to their environmental fair 3 or so weeks ago. I'd always pronounced this region, which is adjacent to the Amazon, as the Cerrado, but apparently it's the Cerrado, I believe, is the Brazilian Portuguese pronunciation of it. So it's not rainforest like the Amazon, it's savanna, but it is massively well, it should be, it still is massively biodiverse, but it is being ravaged, particularly in the era of the previous Brazilian president, who thankfully, that's slightly political, is now no longer the Brazilian president. Land was cleared, soybeans were grown. It was not being controlled or monitored by the government. There might be kind of lip service to these things being regulated, and the multinational companies who might have their local subsidiaries will say, "Oh no, but it's all fine that we're not clearing more land than we're supposed to, and we're certainly not throwing." Local communities off their own farmsteads. Well, there's actually lots of evidence to the contrary. Yes, they were. So probably one of the top three industrial agricultural businesses in the world is a company called Cargill, the US based, but it is they that ship in soybeans from Brazil into the UK through the Port of Liverpool. So that's why it's relevant to us. And we've tried to do something in terms of raising awareness with our politicians, and we're talking some of the city region MPs, and certainly Steve Rotherham. We made him aware of this, and I'll kind of go into a bit of like what happened next in a later slide. But that's like an exemplar of like, we've noticed this problem, we feel we can't ignore it, we have to do something about it. Have we succeeded massively yet? Probably not, but we need not to stop. Very left hand side there, that's me holding the Friends of the Earth Liverpool banner alongside some colleagues from other campaign groups. You probably recognize the two women there, Ros and Nikki from Exile Liverpool and Wirral. So this was another of those examples where we collectively, XR, FoE, one or two other local campaign groups, supported a wider network. And if you remember me mentioning Biofuel Watch, they were kind of key to organising this event. This was the Labour Party conference in Liverpool last year, where unfortunately, perhaps quite innocently, we don't know, Labour thought they were doing the right thing and are giving this kind of green energy provider that is Drax Power Station, a kind of an official platform at one of their side meetings. So some of the more radical campaigners, which wasn't me, wasn't Liverpool Friends of the Earth, actually got themselves invited to be delegates in that meeting. Did the usual kind of activist asking awkward questions, and then obviously we're like marched out of the room 5 minutes later. I mean, it was kind of unfortunate because one of our regional MPs, I think unwittingly, was chair of that session where Drax were platforming themselves as saying, "Oh, look, we're a nice, clean, green, necessary, forward-looking energy provider." So that remains a challenge. Again, as you will remember, because of the Liverpool being this conduit of other people's biomass coming in to feed Drax, and all supported by government funding, which is increasingly being challenged. I think there is more of a recognition now that burning other people's forests and looking forwards, they expect to come under be burying their emissions under the North Sea, which is a bit of a parallel situation to something I'm going to describe in a moment that's going on in off our own coast. Right. I mentioned at the very outset, first slide, there was a logo there that was from Friends of the Earth Mozambique. I won't go into the long story of how we got. I think a couple of us were actually in a webinar, an international FoE webinar, where someone from the Mozambican group was there. For reasons that will become a bit more apparent in the next couple of slides, it felt entirely a constructive and necessary thing to do to kind of establish this contact. The person shown on the screen, and again the link that won't play, takes you through to a short video. This is Annabella Lemouche. She's the director of Friends of the Earth Mozambique. Last year, she was awarded by the Swedish government their Per Anger Award for Human Rights Campaigner. She's the first environmental campaigner that's been given this international recognition by the Swedish government. So again, we are beginning to make some of our decision makers regionally aware that there is this group headed up by this person in Mozambique campaigning on issues that are have their concerning origins with some multinationals that are also operating in our own backyard in Liverpool. Next slide will make this a bit clearer, but basically I'm talking about an oil and gas multinational which is based in Italy, operates in Mozambique, is known to have displaced local communities for a new gas project, but they also operate in Liverpool Bay, and this company is called ENI. Here they are. These are not mock-ups. A neighbour of mine, I live on the end of the world, I live in Hoylake. You can actually see Eni's rig. I think it's about 7 miles off the coast. You can see it off the end of the Wirral. You can see it off Crosby Beach. You can see it from North Wales. They are very often, they're still producing fossil gas, and they're expecting to do this for the next year or so before it winds down. But part of the production of producing natural fossil gas is they are just constantly flaring like that. And there's, in some countries, flaring is by gas and oil rigs is banned unless there's an actual emergency or risk to the crew on the rig, or there's going to be an explosion. You are not allowed to flare like that, but regulations in the UK are so lax, they just take advantage of it. So yes, interestingly, through the contact we had with FoE Mozambique, they suggested to us, oh, we'll put you in contact with this campaign group in Italy called Recommon, named on this slide, who for 10 or 15 years have been like totally on the case of any who are like part owned by the Italian government, and just kind of spotlighting the harms that they're causing both in Italy and to communities globally. Recommon have been over here 2 or 3 times now to meet with ourselves, Liverpool FoE and Chester FoE, and other allies who are challenging this future energy network that Eni are going to be a key part of. And it's been really interesting, both last year at Eni's AGM in Rome, and we're kind of working towards it now at Eni's AGM in Rome in May this year. With Recommon's assistance, because they are Eni shareholders, very effective campaigners. They are shareholders. They are entitled to ask questions at the AGM, and we actually submitted questions to that AGM written questions, and the Italian law is like very clear on this, that written answers have to be provided before the AGM, and that happened last year. So we're kind of going to play that card again this year. And if you remember me mentioning the activist questioners that typically go into other AGMs in the UK, they quite usually get short shrift as soon as they're being like picked up as being like the awkward squad. They're shown the door. But the guys at Recommon have assured us, and this has been our experience so far, I was surprised. It doesn't like work that way in Italy. If you, as a legitimate shareholder, ask a question, it has to be answered, and having that answer in writing is proving to be like really useful. Right, you may or may not have heard of HyNet, this proposed energy network for the region, including North Wales, based on hydrogen. The hydrogen, by and large, even though HyNet and their partners may not dwell on this too much, is not clean green hydrogen derived from breaking down water by electrolysis. It is a direct byproduct of fossil fuels, and that's why our friends Eni are very interested in it. They're even more interested in it because existing industries are recognizing that as CO2 emitters, they need to play their part, and that CO2 needs not to go into the atmosphere any longer. It needs to be safely stored. And HyNet, with their key partner Eni, there they are off to the left in Liverpool Bay. That's their rig, which at the moment is still spewing out all this toxic pollution. It's going to be repurposed, and with the aid of a to be constructed pipeline, the one in solid red that kind of runs along the south side of the Mersey from Stanlow, effectively, through North Wales, out from the point of Ayr, and all this nasty, horrible CO2 will be stored safely forever under Liverpool Bay by our friends Eni, who of course not caused any pollution whatsoever, but they're going to be paid shed loads of money to solve the problem that they have been a key part in creating in the first place. And I think that is like a massive ethical issue. How can the government, and this is part of the budget announcement yesterday, that carbon capture and storage is going to be given yet more funding. So these guys there are going to rubbing their hands thinking, oh, it doesn't matter too much if we have to like wind down on directly producing fossil fuels, because we'll still be raking the money in, because these mugs are going to pay us for sucking the pollutants back out of the system and under the sea. So don't get me going, but yes, I've already got myself going. There's another HyNet partner, SR, at Stanlow Refinery. Probably caught them on a bad day. but that's what it looks like sometimes. Those of you who are concerned about harmful corporates sponsoring things, including sports teams. I mean, I think a lot of people know about Standard Chartered Bank and Liverpool Football Club. Perhaps less well known is that these guys who run Stanlow Refinery sponsor Tranmere Rovers. That is another live link down there. So that this wider alliance of which is called High Net Greenwash or High Not, who are on Twitter, very active. So it's a couple of FoE groups, ourselves and Chester, XR. It did actually originate amongst Green Party members in Chester, really kind of like challenging. We can't take on the whole thing. We're just like looking for like where there might be an Achilles heel here and there in that network. One massive success, and this is like almost breaking news. If you've heard about the hydrogen village that was like being imposed on 2,000 households in Whitby and Ellesmere Port. This is all kind of part of the same picture about hydrogen is the future, and well, it isn't, and it may well be in some industrial sectors, but it certainly isn't the future in domestic heating. There is so much science that points to the fact that it's one of the most, even if it's clean green hydrogen, let alone dirty blue hydrogen, is one of the most inefficient ways of heating a house that you can possibly imagine. But obviously, because the fossil corporates are in on this, and so are the likes of Cadent Gas, it's like the politicians, unfortunately, have been like convinced that this is a necessary direction to go in. So the residents have done of Whitby have done a massively effective job, and they've just about turned around their own council, which is Cheshire Western Chester Council, to realise that they made a mistake in assuming that their own residents could be used by Cadent and British Gas as these hydrogen lab rats. And there is now going to be the leader of Cheshire West Council has agreed that there will be a vote on a question which will be co-designed by the residents to decide whether they want this stuff or not. The council will back them and they will relay that to government. Government wants experiments like hydrogen villages, but it seems like the council, because of the kind of massive campaign the residents have kind of persevered with for several months now, the sense is that government, if this is kind of conveyed by Cheshire Council, won't fly in the face of the kind of prevailing view of the residents. And it's because of that campaign, which we did as the High Not group kind of trigger. But once the residents have been triggered, they were quite capable, more than capable, through national press, regional news, of just like fighting their own corner. And that is like a really heartening success story so far. Right. I'm nearly at the end. So Liverpool Friends of the Earth, we have a seat at the City Region Climate Partnership that Nick knows all about. So it gives us a space to kind of raise some of these concerns with regional decision makers. Basically, this may be a slight misrepresentation. The Climate Partnership is there to advise the Combined Authority and the Metro Mayor on environmental issues and policies, directions of travel that the city region is making. Do you have a bit of a concern about FoE being invited? I don't have a concern about us being invited, but it's a kind of like very limited forum. So some of us within that space are always encouraging the Combined Authority to kind of broaden the base of that involvement from like wider communities. We kind of push things like saying, should there not be an effective climate panel or citizens climate assembly like you have in some other places? We haven't kind of like had that breakthrough moment yet, and we are kind of, as I've already said, we are conscious that all these decisions are being made probably out of sight of 98, 99, 99 point whatever percent of the population being aware of where things have been taken to. City Region Fairness and Social Justice Advisory Board, acronym. Right, so this was a really useful space to go to because Steve Rotherham set it up with, we think, the initial understanding that no city region policy or major project would disadvantage any of the local communities. So with the help of a helpful local MP, we kind of tested the water there, pushed the boundaries a little bit and said, yeah, okay, that's great that you're concerned about social justice in your own area of the 1.5 million people of Liverpool City region. How about the harms and the injustices that are done to these other communities, which, as we've seen before, do have a connection because they're the kind of other end of the supply chain that's coming in through the port. So what we've done is kind of established that Steve Rotherham didn't say that's like off the table, like beyond the scope of the Fairness and Social Justice Advisory Board. Fast jab, let's call it fast jab. That's much easier to pronounce. But as per the third bullet point, when we got into a point of saying, look, there are real problems at the other end of the supply chain with biomass and with soybeans, he said, to complete that third bullet point, he said, I'm only the Metro Mayor. I can't, it's not my role to tell the poor what they can and can't ship in. Right, okay, so we know where we are. But at least the positive, I think, there is that there is this kind of other mechanism for raising awareness of these global issues, which Liverpool does have this connection with. And it was interesting when the dockers were on strike. When was that? 4 or 5 months ago. There was a big kind of push to get. We had at least one day where environmental campaigners went with our banners and our placards to support the dockers, and there were some really interesting conversations there, because if you say to these guys, yeah, obviously your key priority at the moment is to protect your own jobs and get better pay, but perhaps when things are settled down, and maybe that point is now approaching, we'd like to come back to you and talk about the harms, because trade unions are into justice at all kind of levels, and it's happened in Liverpool in the 70s and 80s. They will probably be quite receptive to putting some energy and their voices into the concerns related to some of the products that they themselves are handling. 2 years back, so this was us. That's what one of our groups, Sarah, at the time of the COP26 coalition. So this was running in parallel to COP26 in Glasgow. There was like a grassroots system of, there was a massive rally in London, saying COP26 official isn't doing enough quickly enough. There were regional campaigns, and it was kind of organised in Liverpool over quite a short period of time, probably less than a couple of months, but there was a march, probably several of you were on it, what, 5,000 people marching through Liverpool, usual route, ending up in Derby Square. And one thing that we, FoE, were instrumental in was getting the statements from 3 impacted but connected to Liverpool global communities. So that was Brazil, the soybeans, southern US, the biomass, and Mozambique, because of the connection with the oil and gas corporates that are kind of causing harm there and happily smoking away in our own backyard. So Sarah there is reading out a statement from Friends of the Earth Mozambique, represent that kind of summarize the harm and the concerns of any operating in those communities. And we have given hard copies of that to the combined authority. Shortly after that, G7, or the foreign.
Just say, another minute to allow time for questions, Don?
Margaret, yep. So we at the time of G7 being in Liverpool, we wrote to then Foreign Secretary Liz Truss. So hope you had a nice meeting in Liverpool. But by the way, we would ask that you appeal to the Prime Minister to stop funding gas projects in Mozambique. And right, finally, and this is where you guys come in. 90% of what I've talked about is this like strategic international stuff that because we know it's there, we feel we have to do it, but a bit as per Andy, but probably more so if we can gain some extra capacity, especially we need to do some small stuff as well, not in a disconnected way, because hopefully it's come across to a degree that small stuff is connected to big stuff. But we feel we might be more successful in kind of appealing to more people if we can do some small stuff with us. Great. And by the way, if you're interested, we do some big stuff as well. Everything is connected. Thank you.